This is Kristen with Crossing Timbers Equine. In this educational video, we're going to go over how to tack up your horse with a Western saddle. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab my saddle pad, and I'm going to want to flip it right side. When I store my saddle pads, I store them so that the side that's sitting on the horse is up and away from my saddle or away from my saddle rack, and it has access to the open air. That way, if my saddle pad gets wet from the horse's sweating, it has a chance to dry out, and then that sweat isn't sitting on my saddle and making my saddle dirty and potentially making my saddle mold because of all of that sweat and the salt from the sweat. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is flip my saddle pad so it's right side. I'm going to place my saddle pad up on his neck, and then I'm going to slide it down into position. Now I want to make sure that I slide that saddle pad down so that I lay all of the hair underneath going in the same direction. If I find that I slid my saddle pad too far back and it's not in the correct position, I am not going to come up here and pick up and pull. I'm going to make sure I pick my saddle pad up again and slide it back down to make sure that it is all laying that hair underneath nice and even and in the same direction. We want the front of the saddle pad to be in the middle of his shoulder, and we want to make sure that that saddle pad doesn't come too far back that it gets into his hip. You might need to adjust the size of your saddle pad if your saddle pad is always coming into his hip. If you've got a 32-inch saddle pad, see if a 30-inch saddle pad will fit under your saddle, or maybe a round skirt saddle pad, so that way it stays out of your horse's hip. So we want to make sure the front of that pad is about in the middle of his shoulder, and then that the end of the pad is not in his hip. This saddle pad, because it's been used before, has a little bit of a cheat, and you can see where the rub is here where the cinch sits. So we can use that cheat as well to kind of run down back behind his elbow to make sure that we've got the pad in the right place. We also want to make sure that the pad is laying evenly on the left side as well as the right side, and it's not curled up or crinkled up underneath on the other side. So now that we've got our saddle pad in place, we can go grab our saddle. Now that we've got our saddle, we're going to pick our saddle up and set it up on the horse's back. I always make sure that I put my stirrup up over my horn, as well as keep my cinch up over the seat of my saddle. I like to keep everything up so that way when I lay the saddle up over the horse's back, I don't worry about the cinch or the stirrup getting caught under the saddle. You may have seen people where they have everything laying down, the cinch, the stirrup, and they do a big swing and swing everything and lay it down. If you can handle the swing and get everything up and over, get the stirrup up, get the cinch up so it doesn't get stuck underneath, if that works for you, that's good. I like to keep everything up and out of the way. Pick my saddle up and lay it down right on my horse's back, really nice and soft. Now I'm going to make sure I grab my saddle pad here, and I'm going to put my saddle pad up into the gullet of my saddle. As the horses move, this saddle pad will start to pull down on both sides. And if the saddle pad starts already sitting on top of the withers, it's going to get compressed more and more as the saddle pad pulls down. So I always put a pocket underneath the gullet right here, right above their withers, to help give them some wither relief and not have that saddle pad pushing down on the withers. I want to make sure that my saddle is sitting on either side of the withers. I don't want it too far up where it's going to be up on his neck, and I don't want it too far back where it's going to be back here in his hip. We also want to make sure that our long latigo is laying right down back behind his elbow. So now that we've got the saddle up here, I'm going to go over to the right side and I'm going to lay down my stirrup and I'm going to lay down my cinch. Now I definitely could stand here, unhook, and throw it over, but I've learned from experience that not everything always lays the way you think it should if you stand here and throw everything over. Sometimes you might find where the stirrup gets caught underneath the cinch and then you go to tack up. You end up having to go over to the off side anyway to make sure everything is straight. You might find that your cinch twists. So you've got a twist in your latigo, and then again, you have to go back over to the off side and undo it. So I will go around to the off side, lay down my stirrup, lay down my cinch, then we'll come back to this side and we'll tack them up. Okay, so I got my stirrup laid down and my cinches laid down. I'm going to bring my stirrup up and lay it over my saddle horn. Might as well keep it out of my way, that way I'm not working around it. I'm going to reach under to grab my cinch. Now when I reach under to grab my cinch, I want to make sure I keep my bum facing the same direction as his bum, and I want to put my arm or my hand on his belly so he knows I'm coming down and underneath in order to grab that cinch. Now I'm going to pull my cinch up and I'm going to undo my latigo. I want to make sure that when I start my knot, that it's laying nice and flat. I don't want to have any rolls or kinks in my latigo. So I'm going to bring it through. Then I'm going to take the very point and I'm going to come back behind my D-ring on my saddle, slide it back down again, still making sure that my latigo is laying nice and smooth. Now this latigo is a little long, so I'm going to take my point and come back behind my D-ring on my cinch, feeding it through, making sure it's laying all nice and smooth. And then I can come back up to my D-ring to tie my knot on my D-ring on the saddle. Now it depends on how long your latigo is, how long your cinch is, depending on if you can do a double wrap or if you're only going to do a single. So this is a double wrap because I like to keep my cinches a little bit higher. I feel like it pulls the pressure from the saddle instead of using the pressure against their body. And this is a longer latigo. So this is a double wrap. So I'm going to take my point of my long latigo, come through my D-ring, back behind, and slide it up facing towards his head. Then I'm going to bring my D-ring, I'm going to bring my latigo back, and I'm going to make a circle so that way I can come through the back side of my D-ring underneath to make a loop. Then I'm going to tighten my loop down and put my tail in the collar that I just created. So we're going to come behind the D-ring, up towards his head, loop around, back behind the D-ring, and back down into our collar. Now when I go to tighten this up, I only need to pull the top strap. I'm going to take my top strap and I'm going to pull a little bit of out and up, and that is going to hold that excess from tightening up our cinch. Then I want to feed it through. So I'm going to feed it through from my strap into my collar. Then I'm going to pull it out of my collar and put it in my tail. Now I prefer to use the knot to tighten up my girths, or my cinches, excuse me. You'll find that I go back and forth because I do English and Western. So I like to use the knot when tightening up my cinches. I feel like it gives me more flexibility. Maybe my horse only needs just a little bit of a tighten, so I would pull and just give a little bit of a tight. Maybe that's all I need, is just that little bit. If I rely on the buckle, my horse has to handle going from this hole to this hole before I can tighten it up. I did remove the tongue of the buckle from my cinches, so that way then they're not sitting there flapping. And then I just strictly use my knot to tighten them up. So we got Sly all cleaned up. We put his saddle pad on. We got his saddle on. He's cinched up. We can lay our stirrup down. Then we're going to put his bridle on, and then we're ready to ride. Now it's really important to remember when tightening up your cinch that you do it in small, easy increments. So I gave it a little tighten once I put it on. Then I'm going to put his bridle on. And then after his bridle is on, I'll give it another little tighten. Then we'll go for a walk. And then right before I get on, I'm going to check my cinch again and tighten it again if need be. I don't ever want to have them standing here with this cinch fully tight and just waiting for me to put their bridle on. Maybe I get a phone call, maybe I have to use the restroom, need to talk to someone who came up to the barn. I'm not going to make my horse stand here with this cinch fully tightened up, waiting for me to get ready. So you want to make sure that you do it in nice, slow, easy increments. And this helps to avoid horses so that they don't get cinchy. And just take it nice and easy and little steps at a time, tightening up that cinch. But it is important to remember that you tighten up that cinch so it is snug enough so that the saddle doesn't shift backwards. It doesn't slide underneath their belly while they're standing here waiting. Now that we've tacked up, we've had our ride, it's time to untack. So I always untack in the opposite of where I tacked. So when I tacked up, I put my saddle on first, then my bridle on last. Now when I untack, I'm going to untack his bridle first, then I'm going to take his saddle off. When I take his bridle off, I'm going to unclip him again, so that way I've got free range of motion with his head. You scoot your butt. Thank you. I'm going to take my reins and slide them up so they're right back behind his ears right here. Undo my throat latch strap and let that hang. Then I'm going to put my thumb right under the brow band, right at the base of his left ear. Take my right hand and do the same thing at the base of his right ear. Slide his ears forward and up over, making sure I hold on to that bridle. So then as he opens, we can gently let that bridle fall out and drop out without clanging on his teeth. Then after we've gotten the bridle off, we're going to tie him back up. Good boy. Ooh. And we're going to take our saddle off. I'm going to take my stirrup, throw it up over my horn again to stay out of my way, undo my knot, this cinch is going to start to fall, so I'll grab it and just kind of let it drop. Now with my long latigo, I'm going to tie it back up so that it's out of my way. I'm not tripping on it. It has less chance of getting dirty. So I'm just going to pretend that my cinch is there and then loop it and tie my knot again to hold my latigo in place. So now my latigo is there, it's set, good to go. I'm going to bring my left stirrup down, go around to the other side, lay over my cinch, lay over my stirrup, grab my saddle, and go put it down, and then he's ready to go. When I go to take my saddle off, I've got two options. I can either pick my saddle up so that I pick it up and clear my pad, or I can grab the pad and the saddle all at the same time. So I'm going to grab my saddle under the cantle and in the gullet of the saddle, pick it up, slide it down, and put it down. When I put my saddle on the saddle rack, I want to make sure that I flip that right stirrup down so it's not up on the horn. Whether you've got a neoprene saddle or a leather saddle, that stirrup being up and flipped up will bend and warp the leather, and it will also put memory in that neoprene where then your fender won't lay straight for you. So always make sure you flip that stirrup back down so both stirrups are hanging long. Then I'm going to take my pad and pick it up, and then I'm going to flip it upside down so that way when I put it on top of my saddle to store it, the bottom of the saddle pad can breathe and dry out.